Every nanny quit within days, until she walked in, calm as a whisper, carrying secrets no one dared ask about. The twins, once impossible, sat silent at her feet. But she wasn't just saving them, she was running from something darker. And the truth? It was never about the job, it was about what she lost. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow, we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Julian Hart stood in the center of his penthouse kitchen, sleeves rolled up, shirt stained with something pink and sticky, eyes wild with frustration. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the marble counter, vibrating between business notifications and missed calls. Behind him, a shriek echoed down the hallway. Lily, again followed by a He didn't even flinch. From the living room, Theo's voice rang out, full of sarcasm no 6-year-old should master. Another one bites the dust, Lily. Julian turned just as the latest nanny, this one named Belinda, he thought, came storming down the hallway, hair in disarray, coat half a box, and suitcase already rolling behind her. "Pass it," she snapped, glaring at Julian like he'd personally offended her. "I have a master's degree in child psychology, and I've worked with royal families in Europe, but your children? We're ignored." He opened his mouth to speak, but she was already heading for the elevator. Before the doors could fully close, she hissed, "You can keep the paycheck. No amount of money is worth this." Ding. The elevator doors sealed. Julian sighed and leaned against the kitchen island, defeated. That made 13 nannies in 4 months. The twins stood on the staircase above, silent and watchful. Lily held a paintbrush like a dagger, dripping blue down the banister. Theo crossed his arms, the ghost of a grin playing at the corner of his mouth. To wear her boots again. "Do we get to pick the next one?" Lily asked. Julian didn't respond. He stared at the phone in his hand, where a notification from a major investor blinked in red. He needed to be in the office, not here managing another domestic disaster. His billion-dollar tech company, Heartpoint Industries, was in the middle of launching a major AI initiative. Reporters, shareholders, and analysts were all watching his every move. And yet, all anyone wanted to talk about lately was the viral video. He could still hear the laugh track edited into the clip, Belinda ducking a flying bowl of oatmeal as Theo yelled, "Taste my wrath." Millions of views. Megan, even a remix. He tapped open his schedule. His assistant had blocked the afternoon for emergency nanny interviews. God help him. 3 hours later, Julian sat on a plush chair in the den, blinking at yet another overly enthusiastic applicant in a crisp pantsuit. "I specialize in high-energy children," she chirped. "I believe in play-based learning and gentle boundaries." From behind the door, a crash rang out, followed by giggling. The woman froze. Julia didn't even bother reacting. "They've made grown men cry," he said flatly. "Are you sure?" The woman swallowed hard. "On second thought, I think I may not be the right fit." He didn't argue. She left. By 6 p.m., he had given up. He slumped in his chair, rubbing his temples, as his assistant poked her head in with one final folder in hand. "One more," she said hesitantly. "No formal childcare experience, no resume. Walk in?" Julian groaned. "I can't hire a random stranger." I told her that. She just smiled and said, "He'll want to meet me." Julian raised an eyebrow. "That's bold." "Different," the assistant admitted. "She's been sitting patiently in the lobby for 2 hours, never checked her phone once." Julian hesitated. And then, "Fine, send her in." The door opened a moment later, and in walked a woman who didn't look like she belonged in the polished world of executive hiring. She wore a long, faded coat that was 2 seasons out of style, her hair twisted into a messy bun that somehow didn't look careless. Her eyes, soft brown, steady, met his without blinking. She didn't smile. She didn't fidget. She simply stood there, calm. "Miss?" Julian prompted. "Nora Blake," she said. He waited for more. There was none. She shook her head. references? Fuck you. I can give you a few, but I doubt they'd impress you. He blinked. Then what exactly are you offering me? Nora stepped forward, slow and unthreatening, her tone level. You're not looking for a professional. You've tried that. You're looking for someone who sees them. Julian frowned. Children, she clarified, voice softer now. You want someone who sees them, not just controls them. A flicker of something passed over Julian's face. Before he could respond, a scream tore down the hallway. Lily's again, and a door slammed. Julian winced. Without waiting for permission, Nora walked toward the noise. Julian stood to protest, but something about the way she moved stopped him. She was quiet, but not hesitant, like someone who had walked into chaos before and survived it. From the hallway, he heard nothing for 30 seconds. Then a thud. Then silence. Julian moved, half panicked toward the hall, expecting disaster, but when he turned the corner, he froze. Theo and Lily were sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring up at Nora like she had conjured magic. Lily was holding Nora's hand. Theo was smiling. Julian blinked. What did you say to them? Nora looked up at him, her eyes calm. I asked them if they were tired of not being heard. He stared at her. Lily stood. Can she stay? Theo nodded. She's better than the last one. She didn't flinch. Julian looked from them to her, stunned. Nora merely adjusted her coat and said, If you want references, I'll get them. But you know this isn't about paperwork. He should have said no, should have demanded proof, but instead he found himself muttering, You're hired. Nora nodded once. I'll start tomorrow. She turned and walked toward the guest room without another word, as if she already lived there. Julian stood in the silence, watching his kids follow her like ducklings. He didn't know who Nora Blake was, but something told him she wasn't just here for a paycheck. She was here for something else. And whatever it was, it had already begun. The next morning, Julian Hart opened his eyes to an unfamiliar quiet. No shouting, no crashing, no spilled milk or chaotic footsteps racing across the hardwood floors. For a brief, disorienting moment, he wondered if the children had escaped, or worse, staged a coup. He pulled on a hoodie and padded down the hallway, cautious, listening. In the living room, he froze. Theo sat on the carpet, sketching robots on a notepad. Lily was humming softly, braiding the hair of a stuffed unicorn. Between them sat Nora Blake, cross-legged, sipping tea like she'd been there for years. Julian cleared his throat. 3 heads turned. Lily lit up. Morning, Daddy? Julian blinked. That was rare. Theo didn't speak but gave a small wave. And Nora? She just nodded. There's coffee on the counter. Black, no sugar. You seem like that kind of person. He stepped into the room slowly, uncertain if he was dreaming. How did you... Esther? You guessed my coffee order? Nora shrugged. You're a CEO with 3 phones and permanent shoulder tension. You drink for fuel, not taste. He didn't know whether to be annoyed or impressed. He sat across from them, still dazed. How did you get them to sit still? I didn't, she said simply. I listened. Julian raised an eyebrow. Theo about his sketches. I asked Lily if her unicorn had a name. Turns out she's very particular about names. Lily nodded seriously. Her name is Queen Mabel Sparkletonia, ruler of the Skylands. Julian chuckled and looked at Nora. And that worked? Wasn't about working. It was about respect. Kids aren't wild by default. They act out when they feel invisible. Julian leaned back, trying not to let her words sink too deeply. But they did, because that was exactly how he had felt as a child, shuffled from boarding schools to camps, never really heard, just managed. He watched Theo sketching in quiet focus. For the first time in weeks, the boy's jaw wasn't clenched. Then he looked at Nora. She was composed, unreadable, and yet everything about her presence filled the space like she belonged. There was no badge, no bravado, just calm. He cleared his throat. Where are you from? She didn't look up. Upstate, small town. Family. She paused. Not around anymore. He nodded, sensing not to pry. That night, Julian worked late in his office, but his mind kept drifting. At one point, he checked the security camera app on his phone, something he did obsessively now, half expecting chaos to return. Instead, the feed showed Nora in the twins' room, reading, Lily curled under one arm, Theo resting on a pillow near her feet. They were asleep. Julian sat in stunned silence. The next day, he canceled a press interview just to observe the household in motion. He expected the spell to break. He expected tantrums, accidents, a reveal that this was just a honeymoon phase. But Nora remained steady. She wasn't overly affectionate, but she was gentle. She wasn't controlling, but she never let disorder reign. When Theo shoved a toy across the room in frustration, she didn't scold him. She picked it up, handed it back, and said, "Try again," without the explosion. He did. Even the cook and housekeeper began whispering about her. "She's got something," Julian overheard in the pantry, like a whisper the kids. On the fifth day, something even stranger happened. Julian arrived home from work and heard music. Not a tablet blaring cartoons or a tantrum soundtrack, actual music. A piano. He walked toward the sound and stopped in the doorway of the music room. Theo sat at the piano bench, frowning in concentration. Nora stood behind him, one hand lightly on his shoulder, guiding. Julian's heart caught. He stepped inside. "He doesn't usually play." Nora glanced at him. "He said he doesn't like being bad at things. I told him there's no such thing as bad, only starting." Julian's throat tightened. He said, "That to you?" She nodded. "He listens. He just doesn't always speak first." Theo looked up then, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "I can play with two hands now." Julian smiled, truly moved. "That's amazing, buddy." Nora moved to the bookshelf, retrieving a thin music book. As she passed Julian, he asked quietly, "How are you doing this?" She paused. "I've worked with children before, in places where survival meant silence. I learned to listen between the words." Julian wanted to ask more, but something in her voice told him that door wasn't open yet. That night, he stood in the doorway of the twins' bedroom again. Nora sat at the edge of the bed, brushing Lily's hair as she slept. Theo already snored softly nearby. Julian whispered, "You're a miracle worker." Nora looked up, but her eyes weren't prideful. If anything, they held a flicker of something else. Remorse? History? "I'm just someone who sees what's usually missed," she said quietly. "That's all." Then she gently pulled the blanket over Lily's shoulder and turned off the light. Outside the room, Julian walked with her to the hallway. "Listen," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I know I hired you without a proper background check, but if there's anything I should know—" "I'm not a criminal," she said, almost amused. "Hey, I didn't say you were." She turned to face him fully. "Then what exactly are you asking?" He hesitated. "Why this job? You're clearly overqualified in ways I don't understand." Her gaze softened. "Because I needed to be here." Julian narrowed his eyes. "Why?" She didn't answer. Instead, she nodded once, then disappeared into the guest room. And Julian was left standing in the dark hallway, more curious than ever. Something about Nora Blake didn't add up. But somehow, every part of her presence felt right. And he couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't just shown up to save his children. She had come to save something inside him too. Julian Hart never believed silence could feel so loud. It had been exactly 4 days since Nora Blake stepped into his penthouse and into his children's lives, and something informational was happening. The twins, infamous for their tantrums, their pranks, their relentless testing of boundaries, had not only stopped screaming, they had started listening. Not just to her commands, but to her presence. Julian had watched from the study window as Nora bent to Theo's level and handed him a broken toy car. "Not all things are meant to be fixed," she'd said. "Some just need to be understood." Theo blinked twice, nodded solemnly, and walked away without a single screech or protest. It was nothing short of sorcery. The housekeepers whispered it like gospel. "She's not a nanny," the cook murmured. "She's a whisperer." Julian wasn't sure he disagreed. He'd spent months interviewing candidates with degrees in child psychology, years of childcare, glowing letters of recommendation, yet every one of them fled within days, some within hours. His children, Lily and Theo, had turned manipulation into a science. Lily once called the last nanny an oxygen thief after overhearing Julia use the toy during a board meeting. Theo locked another in the pantry with a manipulated toy spider. But Nora? She'd arrived with no resume, no references, just a quiet, calm, and a linen bag that looked older than the twins. Her only credential had been a sentence: "I've cared for children like yours before." Julian almost didn't hire her, but when she walked into the playroom on that first morning and softly said, "Hello, Theo. Hello, Lily," the air shifted, like the sound of someone opening a book that had been locked for years. They listened. And now, Julian found himself avoiding his own home office just to walk past the twins' room during bedtime, like a ghost haunting the threshold. Tonight, the thunderstorm outside howled through the Manhattan skyline, rattling the glass walls of the penthouse. Yet inside, a stillness settled. He stood outside their door again, one hand resting lightly on the polished frame. Inside, her voice flowed like music. And the little bear said, "I miss her every day, but she left me the stars, and the stars always know my name." Silence. Then Lily's voice, small and breathy. "Did the stars really talk to him?" Nora didn't rush. "No, sweetheart, but when you miss someone enough, everything feels like their whisper, even the sky." Julian exhaled, unaware he'd been holding his breath. The storm groaned again. Rain lashed against the high windows. He'd built empires from precision and dominance. He'd spoken at world summits and negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking. But tonight, standing outside a nursery filled with fairy lights and grief-shaped lullabies, he felt like a boy. Something ancient twisted inside him, something he hadn't felt since Evelyn. Evelyn Hart, had been the love of his life, the only woman who ever matched his ferocity and quiet loneliness. When she died giving birth to the twins, a part of him froze. Not died, froze said, functional, reliable, responsible, but numb. And the twins? He'd failed them. No matter how many elite schools, therapists, or routines he'd tried to force into their lives, nothing stuck. Their eyes remained hollow, their joy performative. Until Nora arrived with nothing but patience and poetry. Julian stepped back quietly from the door and headed down the hall, shoes echoing on the marble floor. In the kitchen, he found Chef Manuel whispering in awe over a flour-dusted counter. "Graftio to eat mushrooms today," Manuel said, as if it were a spiritual miracle. "And not in pasta, on toast." "Toast?" Julia raised an eyebrow. "What's her secret?" Manuel shook his head. "She doesn't lie to them. She says things like, 'Mushrooms are weird. They taste like the ground, but they're good for your warrior brain.' And suddenly, Theo's a warrior." Julian stared out the window at the storm. "She tell you where she's from?" "Only said somewhere with more trees than traffic. That narrows it down to, I don't know, Canada?" Julian smirked, but the curiosity gnawed at him. He'd run background checks, of course. Her ID was valid, no criminal record. But there were gaps. Gaps in years, places she'd been, but no digital trail, no social media, no linked references. Nora Blake was either an intensely private person or hiding from something. But even that mystery didn't overshadow the calm she brought into their lives. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving dew streaks on the window panes and the sweet smell of ozone in the air. Julian woke earlier than usual, pulled on a sweater, and wandered into the dining room. Nora was already there with the twins. Theo had a paper crown on his head. Lily was brushing her toast with a pastry brush. Nora sat beside them, sleeves rolled, laughing gently as Lily declared, "Today, we are royal chefs." Only if royal chefs eat strawberries with their hands, Nora replied, catching a falling berry before it hit the floor. Julian leaned against the doorframe, unseen, watching his children be children. He wasn't used to the sight, or the sound. He cleared his throat. All three heads turned. "Good morning," he said. Lily waved, mouth full of toast. Theo offered his crown like it was currency. Julian chuckled. "For me?" Theo nodded. "You're the king of deadlines." Julian laughed. "That's accurate." Nora looked up, something flickering behind her eyes. Not fear, not defensiveness, just something unreadable, a barrier she carefully reinforced with silence. "I'll be in the study," Julian said. "But if you three decide to overthrow the kingdom, let me know first." Lily nodded seriously. "We'll draft terms." As Julian left, he caught one more glance at Nora. She was smiling, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. That night, Julian couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his pristine penthouse suite, thinking of all the things he couldn't explain. Nora's timing, her instinct, the way his children had begun to laugh again, not politely or cautiously, but with their full lungs. There was something almost sacred about how she moved through their lives. Quiet, constant, never taking up space but always present. The memory of her story the night before echoed in his mind, like the last note of a song. When you miss someone enough, everything feels like their whisper. He couldn't stop thinking about it. It wasn't just a story for the kids. It felt like something deeper. A lived truth. By mid-morning, Julian was at his desk with 2 coffees, one black for himself, one with oat milk and cinnamon, Nora's preference. He'd noticed the way she stirred it slowly, the way her eyes softened when it warmed her palms. He didn't understand why he cared, but he did. When she came by to pick up the kids' lunch schedule, he gestured toward the cup without a word. She paused, blinked, then took it with a soft, "Thank you." That. No smile, no explanation, but her fingers lingered on the cup. He wanted to ask her then, "Who taught you lullabies in 4 languages? Why do you flinch every time thunder cracks? How did you know my daughter needed to be told she wasn't invisible, or that my son isn't just angry, he's grieving?" But she was already turning away, her steps quiet. Later, during the children's nap, he caught her in the library, seated cross-legged between 2 shelves, sorting books into piles. A thin beam of sunlight stretched across her shoulder. In front of her, a stack of children's books, all worn and well-loved. He watched for a moment before speaking. "Didn't know this place still got use." She looked up, surprised but not startled. "I like places that don't pretend to be something they're not," she said, brushing dust off a book. "Old books never lie." Julian stepped inside, leaned against a tall bookcase. "You always speak in riddles." Nora tilted her head. "Only when I think the truth might scare someone." That silenced him for a second. "No," he said. "I've worked with some of the most brilliant analysts in the world, but none of them could calm my kids the way you do." She placed a book aside. "That's because I'm not trying to fix them. I'm listening." He studied her. "And what do you hear?" She met his eyes. 2 children trying to survive a world that took their mother and gave them a father who doesn't know how to cry. Julian froze. He wasn't offended. He was exposed. He decided to sit on the edge of the bed. "Do you know so much about grief?" he asked. She looked away. "Because I've had to learn how to carry it quietly." He stepped closer, but the air between them remained thick, unreachable. "Tell me something true," he said, voice low. Nora stood slowly, dusting off her knees. She tucked one of the books under her arm, The Velveteen Rabbit. "I once lived in a house where silence was more violent than shouting," she said. "And every time someone slammed the door, I told myself I wasn't real enough to stay." Then she walked past him. Julian didn't stop her. He couldn't. The weight of her words sat heavy on his chest. That evening, it stormed again. Harder this time. The rain came in sideways, and the thunder rolled like drums in a war zone. The power flickered. The twins were nervous. Nora sat them on the floor, blankets wrapped around their shoulders, a flashlight propped on its end like a tiny spotlight. She opened a book, then closed it. "One doesn't feel right tonight," she murmured. "Tell us a new one," Lily whispered. Nora looked up. Julian stood by the doorway again, silent. She nodded once, only once, and began. "Once was a fox who lost her tail in a fire. All the other animals mocked her. 'You'll never be beautiful again,' they said, but the fox didn't cry. She walked through the forest with her head high. One day a storm hit, and while the others cowered, the fire in her heart." Theo leaned in, eyes wide. "She wasn't scared?" Nora touched his cheek. She was terrified. But brave isn't the absence of fear. It's walking anyway. Julian stepped closer, crossing the threshold. "Did the fox ever get her tail back?" Lily asked. Nora smiled gently. "No, but she learned that she was never meant to follow. She was always meant to lead." The lights flickered again. The twins huddled closer, but there was no panic, no screaming, just a circle of warmth on the floor. Julian stood in the shadows, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "You tell stories like someone who's lived through war." Nora didn't look up. "Sometimes love leaves behind ruins. We rebuild anyway." He wanted to ask more, push further, but for the first time in years, he understood restraint. The next day, a small envelope was delivered to the staff mailbox. Inside, a note in Nora's handwriting. "To Mr. Hart. Thank you for the coffee. I don't usually accept kindness without suspicion, but yours felt unspoken and unforced. That's rare. Please know that I may not answer questions I'm not ready for, but I will always care for your children like they matter, because they do." Julian folded the letter carefully. He didn't smile, but he felt something stir, something real, something warm. For the first time in 6 years, he wasn't just grateful someone stayed. He was afraid of what might happen if she left. Julian Hart rarely dined with anyone who wasn't on his payroll or holding a contract worth 7 figures. But that night, he found himself staring at his own reflection in the polished elevator doors, rehearsing how to ask his children's nanny to dinner without making it sound like anything other than what it was. Gratitude? Or at least, that's what he told himself. He stepped into the playroom where the twins were finishing a puzzle on the floor. Nora knelt between them, her posture relaxed, her voice soft as she asked Theo to turn the last piece around. Lily giggled when it clicked into place. Julian cleared his throat. Nora looked up first. She always did. "I was thinking," he began, awkwardly adjusting his cufflinks, though they didn't need fixing. "You've done more for these 2 in 3 weeks than anyone else in 3 years." Nora raised an eyebrow. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Hart." He hesitated. "Even so, I'd like to take you to dinner, as a thank you." Liz's eyes narrowed. Lily gasped. "Like a date?" Julian chuckled, eyes shifting quickly to Nora. "No, sweetheart, just dinner, with someone I appreciate." Nora's smile was gentle but brief. "I don't usually go to dinners." He didn't push, but 3 days later she said yes. The restaurant wasn't one of his usual places. He avoided the spotlight for once, choosing a small Italian bistro tucked between brownstones on the Lower East Side. No paparazzi, no board members, no piano solos echoing off marble floors. Nora arrived 5 minutes early, wearing a navy blue dress that wasn't expensive but somehow elegant. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, a silver pendant at her throat catching the candlelight as she entered. Julian stood when she approached their table. "You look," he started, then stopped himself. "Thank you for coming." "You already said that," she replied, sliding into the booth across from him. The waitress came and went. Nora ordered water. Julian asked for wine and paused. "Would you like a glass?" "Thank you." A pause settled between them. "You said you don't usually go to dinners," Julian said carefully. "But you agreed?" Nora folded her hands. "Because your kids asked me to." He blinked. "With Sarah. Pris had said, they haven't seen you smile that much in months. I thought maybe that was worth something." He let out a low breath, caught off guard. "They told you that?" She gave a slight nod. Julian leaned back, studying her. "You know, people don't usually speak to me like this." "You don't seem afraid of me." Another silence. Then she asked, "Is this your favorite place?" He admitted, "But I thought you might like it." Nora's lips curved up, just slightly. "You thought right." Their meals arrived, homemade ravioli for her, grilled sea bass for him. The lighting was low, soft music humming in the background, and for a moment, the world outside didn't exist. She told him about Theo's drawings and Lily's imaginary tea parties. He told her about the twins' mother, how she used to keep them up past bedtime just to sing songs from her old record player. The ache in his voice was barely masked. "I wasn't prepared to lose her," he said, stirring his fork through untouched fish. "Or to be a father alone." "You're not alone," Nora said softly. "Not with them." Julian looked up, startled by how much he needed that reminder. But just as he began to feel the warmth in the space between them, he asked, too casually, "Where did you learn lullabies in Portuguese?" Nora stilled. "I heard you last night. The melody was familiar." She lowered her eyes. "I spent some time in Brazil." He waited. She didn't elaborate. Julian leaned forward slightly. "And before that?" "I'd rather not talk about it." Her voice was firm, though not unkind. It was a line in the sand. He respected it, but he didn't like it. After dinner, they stepped out into the cool evening air. Nora pulled her cardigan tighter, and Julian, without thinking, took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She stiffened slightly, but didn't push it away. They walked in silence to the private car waiting near the corner. As they reached the doors, Nora stopped. "Thank you," she said. Julian turned to her, standing just a breath away. "You're welcome." Their eyes locked. Time thinned. He leaned forward. Just a little, just enough. And she pulled back. "This isn't why I'm here." Her words were quiet, not harsh, just final. Julian swallowed, nodding slowly. Understood. But as the elevator doors closed behind her, he realized two things. 1. He hadn't been trying to kiss her just because she was beautiful. And 2, he hadn't felt that kind of sting since the funeral. The silence in the car ride home was louder than Manhattan traffic. Julian sat back against the leather, staring out the window, but all he saw was Nora's expression, soft, regretful, resolute. "This isn't why I'm here." Her voice had been steady, not judgmental, not wounded, just true. The kind of truth that clung like mist and wouldn't burn off by morning. By the time he stepped into the penthouse, the lights were dimmed and the twins were already asleep, but their laughter still echoed faintly in the walls. Tonight had been their happiest in weeks. They'd watched Nora brush her hair behind her ear, sneak a cherry tomato from Julian's salad, and tell stories about how frogs could predict the rain. It wasn't just admiration they had for her, it was trust. And Julian felt the same. Maybe too much. He walked past the kitchen, through the study, and into his private lounge, where the city skyline stretched wide through the glass. He poured himself a drink, untouched. Then another, also untouched. He didn't want alcohol, he wanted answers. But Nora didn't give those freely. The next morning, Nora was already up, a back to him as she helped Theo tie his shoelaces. She hummed softly, a tune Julian hadn't heard before. Life, melancholy, and bright at once. He stood at the threshold for a moment, watching. She looked over her shoulder, her smile automatic and gentle. "Good morning." Theo ran past him to show off his shoes to the chef. Julian took a step closer. "About last night." She didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She simply stood. "He has nothing to apologize for," she said. "I'm not," he replied. He stopped. How could he explain that the near kiss wasn't about impulse or loneliness? That it wasn't a mistake, but something that felt frighteningly real? Nora waited, eyes steady. When he didn't speak, she returned to Lily, who was already putting socks on her doll. By lunchtime, the house had fallen into its usual rhythm, symphonies of footsteps, laughter, toy collisions, and door chimes. But Julian found himself distracted. In meetings, his mind wandered. During phone calls, he doodled on notepads. He checked the security monitors more times than he cared to admit. Not to spy, but to see if she was still there. She always was. Teaching the twins how to fold napkins into swans. Baking banana muffins with aprons 3 sizes too big. Sitting cross-legged on the carpet, reading from a tattered paperback while the twins clung to her arms like vines. That evening, as Julian walked through the main hallway, he found Nora in the sunroom. Alone this time, she was organizing books once the twins had clearly scattered earlier. "Do you ever rest?" he asked from the doorway. She smiled. "I like quiet hours. Books don't scream." He chuckled, stepping inside. "Thank you again, for Loch Ness. The twins haven't stopped talking about it." Nora gently brushed dust from a cover. "They needed that moment. Maybe you did too." He studied her carefully. "I did, but I think I needed something else more." She froze. "Not romance," he added quickly. "Not romance, not rescue. I needed to feel human again." Her shoulders relaxed, just slightly. "Grief made me mechanical," he admitted. "Efficient, focused, detached. But then you walked in and gave order to my chaos. And it wasn't because you needed a job, it was because you understood." Nora put the book down. "I do understand," she whispered, "but understanding isn't permission. I'm not asking for permission." "Then, what are you asking for?" Julian hesitated, then spoke honestly. "For you not to disappear on me." That more than anything shook something in her. "We've disappeared before," she said, voice low. "It's what I do best." "Then let me be the reason you stay this time." He didn't touch her. He didn't even move. But Nora's breath caught as if the space between them had collapsed. "I need this job," she said finally. "And more importantly, they need me." Julian nodded. "Then we won't cross that line. But I won't pretend I don't see you. Or that you don't matter." Nora's eyes shimmered for a fleeting second. Then she turned back to the bookshelf. "Thank you." That night, as Nora tucked the twins in, Lily whispered, "Do you like Daddy?" Nora paused. "I think your daddy is kind." Theo squinted. "You blushed when he said your name." Nora smiled softly. "Sometimes grown-ups get confused, just like kids." "Will you stay?" Lily asked, holding her hand. Nora squeezed it. "As long as you'll have me." Julian stood outside their door, hearing it all. He didn't move, didn't interrupt. But something unspoken passed between them all that night. Between the man who didn't know how to feel and the woman trying not to. The distance was still there. But it no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a thread. Tight and broken. Waiting? The morning light filtered through the penthouse windows like it did every day, soft and golden. But today, something was different. Julian Hart sat frozen at his glass desk, a printed article trembling between his fingers. Bold black letters screamed from the page. "Missing boy," broke in the voice of the woman. "A word who is the word, you cry. When did it all happen?" Below it was a blurry photo of Nora Blake, walking hand in hand with Theo and Lily down the steps of a museum. The children were smiling, carefree, but Nora's face was shadowed, unreadable, and now, public. Julian didn't even notice when his assistant knocked, or when the espresso on his desk went cold. He had always assumed Nora had secrets. Everyone did. But this was something else. The article claimed Nora had been a school teacher in Oregon, that her foster brother had vanished under her care, that an investigation had followed her for years, and though she was never charged, the questions never stopped. He scrolled through the comments below the article, his stomach twisting tighter with each line. He said, "With who's raising the Hart kids?" This one. "Bet the next one that disappears is Lily or Theo." Luke, CEO Julian Hart, always did have a blind spot for beautiful liars. Julian closed his laptop with shaking hands. He felt betrayed, exposed, stupid, and somehow afraid. Downstairs, in the library, Nora sat cross-legged on the rug, gently guiding Theo's small hands as he attempted to build a crooked tower of blocks. Lily was curled in the corner with her sketchpad, humming a tune Nora had taught her the week before. But Julian wasn't watching any of that. He was watching Nora, her stillness, her patience, the way her face lit up when Theo finally managed to stack the last block. None of it seemed fake. Yet the image from the article haunted him. A younger Nora in a classroom, a missing boy's face in the corner, headlines, police reports, and behind it all, silence. He stepped into the room, his footsteps heavier than usual. Nora looked up immediately, sensing something shift in the air. Julian, she said softly, rising to her feet. You're home early. Speak to you, he said. His voice was clipped, unreadable. The twins glanced up, sensing tension. Go with Maria, he told them. Now. Maria, the housekeeper, peered silently at the door. She reached for the children, and they followed, without protest. But not before Lily turned back, hesitant. Is Nora in trouble? Julian didn't answer. The moment the door closed, silence fell like thunder. Nora stood still, hands clasped in front of her. Is this about the article? She asked. True, he said flatly. Nora swallowed. Parts of it. He threw the paper on the couch between them. You lied to me, he said. You lied to all of us. You didn't tell me your real last name. You didn't mention you were part of a missing persons case. You didn't tell me you were being followed by reporters looking for the next scandal. Her voice trembled. Because none of it defines me. That's not your choice to make, he snapped. I trusted you. I let you into my home, into their lives. I never meant to lie, she said, barely above a whisper. I needed the job, and not for the reasons you think. He stared at her, jaw tight. Then tell me, now. She hesitated only a moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, she crossed the room and sat down in the armchair across from him. The boy in the article, she began. His name is Lucas. Julian said nothing. Pleased my foster brother. I was 22 when he came into my life. He was 9, skittish, brilliant, and completely broken from the system. I was the first person he ever trusted. Her voice caught for a moment. She looked away. Then one afternoon, he disappeared, walked out of school and never came home. No note, no signs of struggle, just gone. She swallowed hard, her eyes distant. For weeks, months, I quit my job, I followed leads, paid private investigators. I lost everything, my apartment, my savings, but I never stopped looking. Julian's expression cracked slightly, but his voice remained cold. Doesn't explain why you're here, why you applied as a nanny. Nora's eyes met his. Because it's the only job that let me keep moving. Watching, listening, being under the radar. People talk around caregivers. They assume we're invisible. And sometimes that's useful. This was all a lie, he asked, voice barely controlled. Your connection with the kids? With me? She said, fierce now. That's the one thing that's real. Julian turned away, fists clenched. Reassuring? I let my children love you. Eyes widened. Loving back, she said quietly. A pause. Thought you were running from something, he said, but you were chasing it instead. Nora stood, arms trembling. I didn't mean to bring danger to your home. I hoped it would stay buried, that maybe I could have something good, even if just for a while. William faced her again, his eyes no longer angry, just wounded. Don't you tell me? Because people don't believe women like me, she whispered. We're always the ones to blame, the broken ones, the bad luck, and I couldn't risk losing this, not after everything. Silence stretched between them again. Then a knock. Julian's assistant poked his head in, hesitant. Sir, Channel 5 is on the phone. They want to comment. and the board wants to know if you are issuing a statement." Nora flinched. "Of course they do," Julian muttered. "We'll go," Nora said. "I'll pack my things and go." Julian's mouth opened, closed, then, with effort, he nodded. "Should." Nora turned and walked toward the hallway, each step heavier than the last, as if the truth she had carried for years had finally collapsed in on her. But she didn't cry, not until she reached her room. And Julian didn't move. Not even when the door closed behind her. Not even when the silence in the penthouse turned into a suffocating roar. Nora folded the last sweater into her bag, her hands moving with robotic precision. Her room, once filled with soft light and the scent of children's shampoo from down the hall, now felt sterile. The framed drawing Lily had given her sat on the desk, two stick figures, one with orange curls labeled "Me," and the other, smaller one holding a book, labeled "Nora." She picked it up, hesitating. Outside her door, she could hear muffled voices, the staff whispering, pretending not to stare. Word spread fast in homes like this, not just through the media, but through glances and silences, the kind that left bruises deeper than words. Julian had said nothing more, and that silence was louder than anything. She took one final look at the room, then closed her suitcase. The zipper sounded like finality. Downstairs, Theo's laughter rang out, followed by a sharp correction from the new weekend caregiver. Nora's chest ached. He never laughed like that for anyone else, but today, maybe he had to. As she stepped into the hallway, she didn't expect to see Julian standing at the top of the stairs. But he was there. His tie was undone, his sleeves rolled up. He looked like he hadn't slept. Their eyes met, but neither spoke. She began to walk past him, slow, measured, and paused only when he finally said, "Nora." She turned slightly, but didn't face him fully. "Oh, report," he said. "Not the article, the real one, from Oregon State." A pause. "You were never a suspect." Nora nodded. "No, but I was never innocent either, was I? He was in my care, and I lost him." Julian's voice lowered. "You were 22. The state gave you a boy with trauma and no support. You did more than most would. You did more than most would." She said nothing. He tried again. "Why didn't you tell me the moment I asked who you were, that day in the interview?" Nora turned fully now, facing him with tears she wouldn't let fall. "Because I didn't want that to be my introduction. I wanted someone to see who I am now, not what I failed at." Julian looked down. "You never failed my kids," he said. For the first time, she let her voice break. "But I did. I failed the one who trusted me first." Julian walked down the stairs slowly until they stood level, inches apart. "You still think he's alive?" he asked. She blinked fast. "Every day, I get alerts, emails, I follow threads on missing persons forums, and I still send letters to every shelter within 100 miles of where he vanished." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then come downstairs, I want to show you something." She frowned. "I'm not asking you to stay," he interrupted gently. "I just want you to see something before you go." Confused but too tired to argue, she followed him. They entered his private study, a room she'd only seen once, during a late-night search for Theo's missing science kit. The room smelled like cedar and old ambition. On the desk sat a sleek silver laptop, open to a series of charts. Nora leaned in. "Those are private investigators," Julian said. "I hired them 2 hours after you told me about Lucas. I've already tasked them with reopening the search." She turned to him, stunned. His voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. "Because if someone took Lily or Theo, I'd burn the world to find them. And because you shouldn't have had to carry that alone for so long." Nora gripped the edge of the desk, overwhelmed. Her lips parted to speak, but nothing came out. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Julian added. "I should have trusted you, asked you, not just read headlines." A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it quickly. "I'm still leaving," she said. He nodded. "Quite well to know." she continued. You were the first person who ever made me feel like I could breathe again. You and your kids. Julian's face was unreadable, but his eyes shimmered. What is it you want? He asked. I wanted you to stay. Nora stepped back, hands trembling. Job was never meant to last. I was supposed to keep moving. I told myself that over and over. It shook her so. Then you didn't, he said softly. They stared at each other, the truth hovering between them like something fragile. Finally, Nora broke the moment. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out Lily's drawing, and set it gently on his desk. Tell her, I'll miss her singing. Julian picked up the paper slowly, his thumb brushing over the crude crayon lines. Nora smiled faintly. Tell him not to mix the red and the blue. It always stains. A breathless chuckle escaped him. It turned to silence just as quickly. Nora turned to go, but at the doorway, she paused again. If your people find anything about Lucas, we'll call you, he finished. Always. She nodded, and then she left. 2 days passed. The penthouse was quieter, somehow dimmer. The twins asked for her constantly. At first, Julian avoided the questions. Then, finally, he told them she had to leave for something important, and that she loved them very much. Lily cried. Theo refused to eat his carrots. At night, Julian found himself staring at the framed drawing on his desk, wondering how he'd let it all fall apart. Then, one evening, as he returned from work, his assistant met him at the door, breathless. Sure, she said, someone dropped this off. She handed him a small envelope. Inside was a photo. A boy, maybe 12 or 13, standing outside a shelter in Denver. Scrawled on the back in messy handwriting, this kid showed up last night. Quiet. Says his name is Lucas, no last name. Julian stared at the photo, heart pounding. He reached for his phone and dialed. Nora was in a motel just outside the city, packing to move again, when the phone rang. A known number. She hesitated, then answered. Julian's voice filled her ear. Nora, I think we found him. She dropped the phone. Her knees gave out. And for the first time in years, not from fear, not from grief, but from something that tasted like hope, she wept. It started as an ordinary Wednesday. Theo's school dismissal routine was carefully structured. Nora always arrived 10 minutes early, stood beneath the shade tree outside the main gate, and waited with a granola bar in her left pocket, just the way Theo liked it. But that day, a scheduling error flipped the entire rhythm. The school had hosted an emergency staff meeting. The twins were released 15 minutes early. By the time Nora arrived, Theo was gone. The receptionist offered a tight-lipped apology. He said someone else came to pick him up, a man. Nora's blood turned to ice. She sprinted through the playground, scanning every corner of the block. Theo, she shouted, heart racing. Theo! No answer. Her voice grew hoarse. She pulled out her phone and called Julian, panic pressing into her chest like a vice. He's not here, she gasped when he answered. What do you mean? Julian's voice was cold and sharp. He's gone, Julian. Someone took him. There was a long silence, then the unmistakable sound of a chair being knocked over. I'm coming, he growled. Nora hung up and kept running. By dusk, the entire block was swarming with private security, school officials, and a growing crowd of reporters catching wind of the missing Hart twin. But no Theo. Nora refused to leave the school perimeter. She searched every alley, park, and bench within a 10-block radius. Hours passed, her feet throbbed, her hands trembled. Still she searched. And then, just as the sun sank behind the skyline, she saw a pair of sneakers peeking out from under the rusted slide in a nearby park. She knelt down slowly. A small face turned toward her, tear-streaked and pale. You came, he murmured. Nora's breath caught in her throat. She gathered him into her arms, hugging him tightly. Thought they took me, he whispered into her neck. Like your brother? Her whole body stilled. "What?" she choked. "You said. They took him and he never came back. I thought I'd disappear too." Nora held him tighter, rocking gently. "No one is going to take you, Theo. I promise you. I will always find you." Minutes later, Julian arrived in a black SUV. The tires screeched to a halt. He jumped out before the car fully stopped. "Sue it!" he roared, eyes wide. The boy pulled away from Nora just long enough to throw himself into his father's arms. Julian sank to his knees, holding his son with trembling hands. "You're okay. You're okay," he kept saying, over and over. Then he looked at Nora, really looked at her, and something broke across his face. Relief, rage, guilt, fear. But before he could speak, Theo fell asleep in Nora's arms, exhausted from tears. They rode home in silence, Julian gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Nora sat in the back with Theo sprawled across her lap. When they returned to the penthouse, Lily ran into the foyer, arms flaming, tears already in her eyes. "You're okay," she sobbed, hugging her brother as Nora gently carried him in. The children were tucked into bed. Then Julian turned to her. "You need to tell me the truth now," he said, voice low. She met his gaze, tired, hollow. "You already know it." "Did you tell my son about your brother?" He flinched. "Why?" "Because." He was scared, she said, her voice a whisper. "He saw a news clip. He asked about the missing boy. He kept asking what happens when people disappear. I told him the truth, gently. I thought..." Julian turned away, pacing the length of the living room. "You thought you were protecting him by sharing your trauma. I thought he needed to understand fear wasn't something to be ashamed of." Julian's eyes locked onto hers. "And now my son thought he was going to be kidnapped because of a mistake in a school schedule." Nora's hands curled at her sides. "I never meant for this to happen." "It did." There was a long pause. Nora looked down at the floor. "This isn't working." Julian frowned. "What are you saying?" "Anus?" Judd watched him in the hall. His jaw heartbroke. "Your children, I love them too much to be the reason they're afraid." Julian's eyes widened. "You're leaving?" Nora nodded slowly, voice cracking. "It's not safe. For them, for me, for the bond we've built. I was supposed to protect them, not pass my ghosts on to them." Julian stepped closer. "You didn't fail them." Nora shook her head. "I did. Today proved it. And I can't stay and pretend that my presence doesn't complicate everything." He reached for her hand, but she gently pulled it away. "Came here to do a job," she said softly. "To help two children feel safe again. That's all I wanted, but I let myself get attached. I let myself forget why I was here." Julian's throat worked around the words. "Don't do this." Her heart. She turned and walked down the hallway toward her room, leaving him standing alone. Within an hour, her bags were packed. The twins were asleep. The night air felt heavy, like the walls themselves were mourning her decision. Nora stood by their door for a long time. Then she slipped in, kissed Lily's forehead, and brushed the hair from his face. "Love you," she whispered. "More than you'll ever know." And then she was gone. Julian stood at the window, watching the elevator lights descend, lower and lower, until the screen went dark. In that silence, something inside him collapsed. Julia didn't sleep that night. He sat in the twins' room, one hand on Theo's blanket, the other gripping a half-finished drawing Nora had once helped Lily make. It was a stick figure family, drawn in colored pencil. 4 people, not 3. He remembered the moment he saw it and how he had laughed. "Who's that?" he'd asked, pointing to the 4th. Lily had beamed. "Nora," she'd said. That same name now echoed in every silent corner of the penthouse. By morning, the staff noticed the shift. The laughter that used to float from the breakfast table was gone. The twins sat quietly, pushing scrambled eggs around their plates. "When are you coming back?" Theo asked, his voice small. Julian didn't answer right away. He knelt beside his son. "Not today," he said softly. "But she loves you very much." Lily wiped her eyes. She promised to stay. Julian had no words, only the aching truth pressing against his chest. In his office, he reviewed security footage, not to check on Theo, but just to see her face again. She'd looked back once before exiting the building, just a glance at the lobby as if memorizing it forever. That glance broke him. His phone buzzed, an email from the PR team. Another tabloid had picked up on the school incident. Mysterious Nanny leaves after our son. Julian slammed the laptop shut. He walked out of the office without a word and got into his car. He didn't know where she went. He only knew she hadn't gone far. Nora sat on the edge of a tiny bed in a rented studio apartment. The silence was deafening. It was nothing like the penthouse. No gleaming windows, no curated art, no sounds of soft feet running through marble hallways. Just her thoughts, her guilt. She unpacked, slowly, a single duffel bag, her clothes, her brother's case file, a crumpled drawing Theo had made of the solar system. Nora, at the center like the sun. She pressed it against her chest and cried. For hours. Until a knock came at the door. She didn't move at first, didn't want to hope, but the knock came again, gentle, steady. She opened the door to find Julian standing there, his eyes rimmed red but his shoulders squared. I didn't know where else to go, he said. She stepped aside. He entered, looking around the tiny space, visibly uncomfortable, not with the size but with what it meant, that she was gone. She said, voice rough, "You don't owe me that?" Nora crossed her arms. I made the choice, Julian. You don't have to come here out of guilt. I'm not here out of guilt, he said. I'm here because my children ask for you every morning. Because their laughter left when you did. Because I can't stop thinking about the look in your eyes when you found Theo. That kind of fear. He broke off. She softened but stayed still. Fear doesn't mean I belong in their world. He took a slow breath. You belong because you love them, because they trust you. What about you? He looked at her then, full and raw. I trust you more than I trust myself. Nora's voice trembled. I've spent years trying to find one person I lost. I never meant to let two more walk into my heart. Julian stepped closer. You don't have to carry the past alone. She shook her head. You don't know what it's like to live every day wondering if you failed the one person who depended on you. No, he said, but I know what it's like to lose the one person who made life make sense, and then have to raise two souls who look like her, and laugh like her, and ask questions I never know how to answer. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something, a folded piece of paper. Found this under Pio's pillow, he said. It was a letter, scrawled in messy crayon. Dear Nora, please come back. I'm not scared when you're here. Love, Theo. Nora pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears slid down her face. Dead. I don't expect anything, Julian said quietly. But they need you, and I think I do too. She turned away, pacing toward the window, arms wrapped around herself. Can't be their mother, Julian. I'm not asking you to be. Then what are you asking? He took a step forward. To come home, to be the person who makes them feel safe, to be the calm in the storm, to be what you've already become without trying. She turned, eyes searching his. And what if I lose someone again? He held her gaze. Then you won't face it alone. Her breath caught. She can't promise I'll be perfect, she whispered. Mark looked at him with some surprise. The quiet between them pulsed like a heartbeat. And then she nodded. I'll come back, but not for the job, she said. Julian stepped closer. For them? To them, she nodded. Then, quieter, and maybe, for me. He smiled, and it was the first real one in days. He didn't touch her, just stood there, as if afraid that any movement would shatter the moment. But she reached out and took his hand. And in that simple touch, the rift began to close. The apartment felt colder without her. Even the light seemed different, more reluctant to pour in through the penthouse windows. Julian stood in the twins' playroom, staring at the pile of untouched toys. Lily sat curled on the window seat, hugging a stuffed giraffe. Theo was sprawled on the floor, not tantruming, not yelling, just... That was the worst part. Before Nora, their home had been chaos, but at least it was alive. Now it felt like a cathedral after a funeral. Silent, reverent, wrong. "Who you want to play with me?" Julian asked softly, crouching near Theo. The boy didn't even blink. A week had passed since Nora left. Then 2, then 3. Each day, Julian promised himself he'd stop thinking about her. Each night, he failed. She hadn't left a trace. No message, no note. Just a gaping space where warmth used to be. He tried to fill it with extra staff, new toys, longer work hours, but nothing reached the twin. Or him. On a rainy Thursday morning, he walked into his office and stopped cold. Small package sat on his desk. No name, no return address, just his initials in a child's handwriting. Heart pounding, Julian opened it. Inside was a folded drawing on thick paper. Crayons had been used, bold and messy. It showed 4 stick figures, 2 small, 1 tall, and 1 with long dark hair standing between them. Beneath the picture was a single sentence in pink. "Bring her back, Lily." Julian sat heavily, his throat tightening. Beneath the drawings, something else had been tucked into the envelope. A worn, leather-bound notebook. Nora's handwriting lined the pages, neat, precise, and heartbreaking. It wasn't about nanny schedules or meal plans. It was a journal, a record of her search. Each page was marked with dates, photos, names, and locations. Missing person reports, crumpled police forms, letters unanswered, and one page, torn at the edge, showed a boy's face circled in red ink. Beneath it, Jacob, age 9, last seen, Cleveland. Julian read through every line, and when he reached the final entry, he stared for a long time. "I didn't lose hope, I just lost myself." By the end of the day, he had his security team working, not for a business merger or competitor investigation, but for Nora's brother. 2 nights later, he stood outside a modest apartment in Brooklyn, file folder in hand. He didn't call ahead, didn't send a text, he just knocked. The door opened slowly. Nora blinked at him, stunned. Her hair was pulled back in a messy braid. She wore a faded hoodie and no makeup. Her eyes were tired. "Julian," she said, like she didn't trust herself to say more. He held up the folder. "I think I found something." She stared at it, then at him, frozen. "May I come in?" Wordlessly, she stepped aside. The apartment was small, but warm. A stack of children's books sat on a side table. Not for the twins, just something she'd never stopped buying. Julian set the folder on the table and gently opened it. Inside, a photo. A boy, now older, 13 maybe. The resemblance was subtle, but it was there. Face recognition software hit on this image, Julian explained. He's in a group foster home upstate, no official name listed, but, he tapped the file, they call him Jay. Nora's hands trembled as she lifted the photo. She didn't speak. Her eyes welled slowly, silently, until tears slipped down her cheeks. She sat on the edge of the couch, one hand still holding the picture, the other covering her mouth. Julian sat beside her, not close, just near enough that she knew she wasn't alone. "Why did you do this?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. And softly, "Not because I had to, but because I need to." Bree's breath hitched. She turned to him slowly, eyes shining. For the first time since they met, her composure cracked completely. She leaned forward, pressing the photo to her chest, and wept. Julian didn't speak. Didn't try to fill the silence with empty words. He simply reached out, hesitantly, and she didn't flinch. Julian didn't expect to stay long. He had thought he would hand over the file, say a few words, and leave her to whatever healing might follow. But 2 hours later, they were still sitting in that quiet Brooklyn apartment, side by side, on the worn couch. A cup of untouched tea sat between them. Outside, the city moved like it always did. But here, time slowed. Nora finally looked at him. "I thought maybe he was gone forever," she said. Her voice was husky from crying, but steady now. "I thought if I accepted that, I'd be betraying him, but if I didn't, I'd never live." Julian didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Nora ran her fingers over the photo again. "Jay," she whispered, "he might not even remember me." "You remembered him," Julian said, "and that matters." She looked at him then, truly looked, and something in her expression softened. She hadn't seen him this way before, not as the polished CEO with sharp suits and sharper commands, but as someone who could sit in her silence and not be afraid of it. "For a moment," she murmured, "for not telling you the truth sooner." He didn't hesitate. "You don't owe me that apology," she said gently. "I didn't trust you. I let fear write the rules. You gave me your home, you let me care for your children, and I kept a part of me buried." Julian leaned forward slightly. "Everyone's afraid of something, Nora. I built a glass tower because I was afraid of loss. I wore suits like armor, but then you walked in with soft shoes and storybooks and changed everything." A small smile tugged at her lips. "You're really terrible at metaphors." He laughed. It was soft, real, the kind that came from somewhere behind the ribs. Nora reached for the file again, flipping to a second page. There were school enrollment records and a social worker's note mentioning Jay's tendency to wander off and sit in trees, because they made him feel like he could see home from higher up. Her eyes burned again. He always loved trees. Julian watched her gently touch the page like it was sacred. He knew this wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The search wouldn't end with one photo or one lead, but it was movement. It was hope. "Do you want me to come with you?" he asked. She blinked. "To home. To meet him." Nora hesitated, her hands closed around the file. "I don't know. I think I need to do that part alone." He nodded. "Okay." "Don't," she added softly, "would you be here when I come back?" There was no hesitation in his answer. "Yes." They didn't talk much after that. Julian left not long after, but he did so with something in his chest that hadn't been there in weeks. Not certainty, not even peace, but possibility. The next morning, he stood in the twins' room. Lily was curled under a blanket, her eyes on the doorway. Theo clutched a pillow, pretending not to notice him. Julian sat at the edge of the bed. "I saw Nora," he said. Both kids shot up instantly. Their eyes were wide and waiting. "She's okay," Julian continued. "She misses you both." Lily crawled forward on the bed. "Did you tell her to come home?" Julian hesitated. "No, I didn't have to." Theo frowned. "But she's not here." Julian smiled faintly. "Sometimes people leave because they need to heal something first. But when they love you, they find a way back." The twins didn't answer. But that night, Lily drew another picture, this one of a house with 4 windows, all lit. When Nora returned from the visit days later, she didn't knock on Julian's door. She didn't text. She simply walked through the penthouse front entrance, as if she'd always belonged. The twins heard the door before they saw her. And when she stepped into the living room, they froze. Theo spoke first, as always. "Did you find him?" Nora knelt. "I found a piece of him." Lily ran into her arms, and Theo wasn't far behind. They wrapped themselves around her like vines to a branch, and she held them both, her chin resting on top of Lily's head. Julian stood in the hallway, watching, not intruding, just breathing. Later, when the kids were asleep, Nora joined him by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city pulsed beneath them, but for once, neither needed its noise. "Thank you," she said. Julian didn't look at her. "You should have seen their faces." He glanced over, and this time, she didn't flinch. "Are you staying?" he asked. "Home?" she said honestly. "I think I might be, at least long enough to find out what home feels like again." Julian nodded. "Then, I'll make sure there's room." Her smile, small and slow, was the most honest thing she'd given him yet. And that neither of them needed to say anything else. Julian stood by the window of the penthouse, watching the skyline flicker in the early dusk. His phone was silent, the twins upstairs quieter than they'd ever been. Since Nora left, the apartment had felt too large, too cold, like a stage after the actors had gone. Every morning he checked the mail, half hoping to find another note, another scribble from Lily. Every night he stared at the rooftop door and wondered what she would have said if she'd stayed. But today was different. The doorbell chimed. Julian's chest tightened as he walked across the marble floor. The butler opened it, and there she stood. Hair tucked under a wool cap, cheeks pink from the wind, a suitcase in one hand, the other clutching a folded drawing. Julian didn't speak. He couldn't. The silence between them hummed with every word they hadn't said. Then, out of nowhere, a shriek. Nora? Lily bolted down the stairs, Theo just behind her, legs wobbly in excitement. Nora dropped the suitcase, sank to her knees, and caught them in her arms as they crashed into her. Julian watched as Nora closed her eyes, holding them like she was afraid to let go. Lily sobbed against her chest. "I missed you every day." Theo's voice cracked. "We thought you left forever." Nora smoothed Theo's hair and kissed Lily's forehead. "I never left you, sweetheart. I was just finding the way back." Julian stood frozen. There were things he wanted to say, but none would match the way she looked at the children, as if their laughter had stitched her back together. Hours passed. The twins refused to leave Nora's side, dragging out games they hadn't touched since she left. They insisted she read 3 stories in a row, then demanded she join their tea party in the living room. Julian watched from the kitchen, arms folded, heart aching in a way he couldn't explain. When the children finally slept, Nora stood in the hallway, her figure backlit by the nightlight in Lily's room. She turned, saw him watching. "I didn't know if I should come," she whispered. "I didn't know how to ask," he replied. Their voices were hushed, uncertain. Julian walked to the hallway table and picked up a small velvet box. But it wasn't a ring. He opened it to reveal a single key. "To what?" she asked softly. Julian stepped closer, placing the box in her hand. "To the Nora Blake Foundation. It's real, it's funded, it's already helping foster kids get placed into real homes. So this is Nora's dream." Nora blinked, stunned. "You named it after me? And you built it. I just made it official." She looked down at the key. Her hands trembled. "Why?" Julian held her gaze. "Because the world needs more of you. Because the twins weren't the only ones lost after you. Lost." She stepped back, overwhelmed. "Julian, I'm not asking anything of you," he said, reading the worry on her face. "No role, no title, no promises. I just want you to know what you did mattered. Still does." Silence. Then a small smile crept onto her lips. "You're not exactly the cold CEO the tabloids warned me about. You're not exactly just a nanny." He extended a hand. She hesitated. Then slowly she took it. "Come with me," he said. He led her up the winding staircase to the rooftop. The night air was cool, the breeze brushing past their faces. The city sparkled around them, loud, alive, but up here it felt distant, quiet, like the world had paused for them. Julian walked to the edge, where a small garden bed of winter roses had somehow bloomed. He picked one, red, stubborn against the cold, and handed it to her. "What do you know about Perry? I don't want another nanny," he said, voice shaking. "I want you." Nora looked at the rose, then at him. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too. People alone for so long I forgot how to be anything else. Then we can learn together." She looked down, eyes shining. "What if I mess it up?" "You won't." "How can you be sure?" "Because," he said gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "you saved my children, and then you saved me." Nora stared at him. Julian didn't lean in this time. He didn't reach. He just stood there, still certain. Nora's hand gripped his tighter. She didn't kiss him, but she didn't let go. Nora stood beside Julian under the city's glowing skyline, her fingers still wrapped around his. The rooftop air whispered through the leaves of the rose bushes, and for a moment, everything stilled. The noise below, the ache inside her chair, the weight of everything she had carried. All of it went quiet in the presence of that single touch. She turned her face slightly, glancing at him with a question in her eyes. Why me? Julian looked back, serious. Because you walked in and gave this broken home its heartbeat again, and you never asked for anything in return. Her voice was barely a whisper, but I came with baggage and secrets and fear. And somehow, he replied, you turned those things into bedtime stories and lullabies and moments that brought my kids back to life. Her grip tightened involuntarily. He exhaled. I didn't fall in love with a perfect woman. I fell for a woman who refused to break even when the world gave her every reason to. She blinked, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. You say that so easily, but I've spent years afraid to attach, to trust, to be trusted. Julian stepped forward slowly. I'm not asking you to promise anything. I just want to stand with you, however long you'll let me. Nora looked down at the rose in her hand, the petals trembling with the breeze. I don't know how to love someone without fearing I'll lose them. You already love two people like that, he murmured, and they never once doubted you. Her breath hitched. The wind picked up slightly, sweeping her scarf from her shoulders. Julian caught it mid-air and wrapped it gently back around her. I don't need grand gestures. I just want the truth between us. Always. She nodded slowly, chest rising with a breath that felt like the first real one in years. They stood there for a while longer, not speaking. The skyline twinkled like stars that had descended into the streets below, and above them, the moon hovered as if listening. Finally, Nora broke the silence. Can I see the space? Julian blinked. What space? Foundation. His eyes lit with a mix of relief and awe. You want to go now? She smiled faintly. If I wait, I might run. He laughed once, low and breathless, then reached for her hand again. Then let's not give fear the time. Minutes later, they stepped into the office building across town. It wasn't a skyscraper, it wasn't glass and chrome. It was warm, filled with soft lighting and shelves of children's books, handmade drawings framed on the walls, and a reception desk with colorful toys scattered beside it. Nora walked slowly through the hallway. Her name was etched in gold letters on a wooden placard, the Nora Blake Foundation for Foster Care Support and Search Assistance. She swallowed hard. Julian stood back, letting her take it in. There was a wall of photos, smiling children, adoptive families, letters from social workers. The table near the back, a file folder sat neatly in the center. She opened it. Inside were photos, case notes, addresses, pages and pages of information about her brother's case, including leads she hadn't been able to access before. Private investigators, witness statements, possible location. She stared at them, hands trembling. Julian stepped behind her. I pulled every connection I had. I hired a search consultant. There's reason to believe he's alive, somewhere in Oregon. We're narrowing it down. Nora's legs gave out. She dropped into the chair behind her, staring at the folder. She whispered. Julian nodded. I didn't want to bring this until I was sure. I still don't know everything. But I know you shouldn't be searching alone anymore. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Julian crouched in front of her, his voice rough. You gave my children something no amount of money ever could. You showed them it was safe to love again. And in return, I just want to help you find your missing piece. Her hand covered her mouth as the emotion overwhelmed her. I don't know what to say. Fierce tattoo. You don't have to say anything. She looked at him, truly looked past the designer clothes, the boardroom presence, the title, and there he was, a man standing still so she could come back at her own pace. She touched his cheek gently. You waited for me. He held her gaze. I'd wait again. Back at the penthouse later that night, Nora stood in the doorway of the twins' room. Lily slept with one arm flung across Theo's chest. Their matching breathing was soft and steady. Nora walked over and kissed both their foreheads. Julian appeared behind her, quiet as ever. They haven't smiled like that in weeks. I wasn't sure if I should stay tonight, she said softly. You don't have to decide right now. She turned to him. Then let me just be here, with them, with you. He nodded, then stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. They stayed there, side by side, in the soft light of the hallway. The family they hadn't known they were building breathing quietly in the room beside them. For the first time in years, Nora didn't feel like she was running. She felt like she was home. The garden was alive with soft laughter, the rustle of spring blossoms, and the faint hum of a string quartet tucked beneath an ivy-covered arch. Sunlight filtered through the branches above, dappled and warm as Nora stood still at the edge of the aisle, her hands gently clasping a bouquet of hand-picked wildflowers. Her dress wasn't designer, but it was hers, a simple ivory gown stitched with quiet grace. The lace fluttered slightly in the breeze. Beside her, Theo and Lily held the hem of her dress like royal attendants. Their beaming faces shone with excitement, cheeks flushed, hair slightly messy from having helped decorate the garden with Julian earlier. Ahead, Julian stood beneath the arch, no tie, just an open collar and a heart in his eyes. When Nora's brother took her arm, his frame still thin from years of hardship but his steps proud. As she walked down the aisle, the world faded into a hush. Every breath she took was filled with the scent of jasmine and possibility. When she reached Julian, her hand trembled slightly in his, but her eyes held steady. "Ready?" he whispered, voice low enough that only she could hear. She smiled. "For the first time, I think I really am." Their vows were simple, honest, no grand metaphors, just truths shaped by time and earned through fire. Julian spoke first, his voice cracking only once. "I thought I had everything, but I didn't know what home felt like until you walked into my life carrying a storybook." Nora's reply came softer, but just as steady. "I came to hide. I stayed because your children taught me how to love again, and you—" Her voice faltered, but she held his gaze. "You reminded me I still had something left to give." They kissed to the sound of wind chimes and Lily squealing, "Ew!" before giggling into Theo's shoulder. The laughter was warm, real, a different kind of music that wrapped around them like a blessing. Later, at the garden's edge, guests toasted under strings of fairy lights. Julian lifted his glass, not to speak of profits or power, but of new beginnings. "To family," he said simply. "To the kind that saves you, even when you don't realize you're lost." Applause rang out and Nora's eyes shimmered as she leaned into his side. Her brother, standing nearby with a quiet smile, squeezed her hand. Their bond tested, stretched, almost broken, had found its way home too. It had taken months, a network of private investigators and the kind of funding only someone like Julian could provide. But one evening, not long after she and Julian reconciled, a phone call came. A social worker in Denver, a boy who'd lived under the name Marcus Hale since he was 10. He'd never known where he came from, only that he had nightmares of a sister who used to read to him under a blanket fort. When Nora stepped off the plane and saw him for the first time, older now, wary, taller than her, the breath left her lungs. His eyes, though, were the same, haunted, hopeful. He hadn't let go of the memory of her either. "I kept a compass," he'd whispered, his voice breaking. "You said it would lead me home one day." They'd held each other for what felt like a lifetime on that airport floor. No cameras, no headlights, just two souls that had survived more than most would understand. Her brother was home, and with that, every piece of her heart finally found its place. Now, a year later, the penthouse no longer echoed with cold silences or tiptoed grief. Its walls wore crayon sketches and framed photos. The windowsill had a row of tiny succulents, each named by the twins. Nora's laughter, low and full, moved freely through the space. The foundation Julian created in her name had helped dozens of foster families reunite. They hosted storytelling nights at local shelters. Theo and Lily helped pack backpacks with books and snacks. On weekends, the rooftop transformed into a reading garden. And sometimes, just before bedtime, Nora would catch Julian lying on the floor with the twins curled up on either side of him, fast asleep. He once told her, "This isn't the life I imagined. It's better because it's real." And tonight, as rain gently tapped the windows, the penthouse glowed with lamplight and laughter. Inside, a blanket fort made of couch cushions and fairy lights, Nora held an open book. Theo leaned against her shoulder. Lily was curled on Julian's lap, twirling a lock of her hair. "Ready?" Nora asked. "Ready," they chirped in unison. Her voice carried the story through the room, each word wrapped in warmth, strength, and calm. It wasn't just a bedtime story, it was a promise, a rhythm of healing they'd built together. On the wall beside them, taped with crooked pieces of glittered tape, was a crayon drawing of 4 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. Above it, in bold, uneven letters, "Our family, forever." Later that night, when the twins were asleep and the house had quieted to a peaceful hum, Nora stepped out onto the rooftop with a cup of tea. The skylight glittered around her, city lights blinking like stars trapped in steel. She pulled Julian's sweater tighter around her shoulders and took a slow breath. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. Julian wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "They're out cold," he murmured. "Even Lily didn't ask for water 3 times." Nora chuckled, her hand resting atop his. "They've had a good day, a good year." He nodded, brushing a kiss to her temple. "You gave them that." She turned in his arms to face him. "No, Julian, we gave it to them. You fought for them, for me, for things most people would have ignored." A pause stretched between them, not uncomfortable but full of everything they'd survived, full of gratitude, full of home. Julian pulled something from his pocket, a small silver locket. Inside was a photo of the twins, a dried flower from their wedding, and a tiny note that read, "Home is not a place, it's us." "I wanted to give you this today," he said softly, placing it in her palm, "but I got distracted building a dinosaur-shaped fruit tray with Theo." Nora laughed, eyes shining. "Thank you. It's perfect." They stood in silence for a moment, leaning into each other. The air was cool, but it didn't matter. The warmth between them had nothing to do with temperature. Eventually, they went back inside, turning off lights room by room until only the gentle glow of the nightlight in the twins' room remained. Julian paused at their door, watching Lily snuggle against her stuffed rabbit. Theo's legs sprawled over his blanket like a starfish. "She used to cry every night," he whispered. "You know that?" Nora nodded. "I remember. The first night, she asked me if I knew how to erase bad dreams." Julian's voice thickened. "And now?" "Dreams in color," Nora whispered. "Theo too. You can see it in how they draw." In the hallway, she paused by the wall where the twins had taped their newest masterpiece. The same 4 figures under a rainbow, only now a 5th figure stood next to them. It had glasses and a compass necklace, her brother. The caption underneath had changed. It now read, "Our real family forever." Her breath caught. Julian saw it too, and together they stood in reverent silence. Upstairs, the Foundation's latest newsletter was spread across the kitchen table. Photos of smiling children with backpacks, parents reunited, volunteers reading under murals painted by Lily and Theo. At the top of the page, the Hart Foundation, inspired by Nora's story, built by love. Nora ran her fingers along the edge of the newsletter. "Do you ever think," she said slowly, "that if none of it had happened, if I'd never lost my brother, if I'd never become a nanny, if you'd never needed help?" Julian finished for her. "We might have never found what really mattered." She nodded. "Exactly." He reached across the table, lacing his fingers with hers. "I don't believe in fate," he said, "but I do believe in second chances. And you gave me mine." She squeezed his hand. "We gave each other ours." The clock ticked gently in the background, marking not just time, but a new kind of rhythm, one of steadiness, of healing, of peace. Later that night, Nora slipped into bed beside Julian, their hands naturally finding one another beneath the covers. She lay there, listening to the quiet, the soft creak of the wind, the faint hum of the city, the occasional giggle from Lily talking in her sleep. And for the first time in years, Nora didn't brace herself for a nightmare. She didn't listen for footsteps or chase shadows in her mind. She simply closed her eyes and slept. Because she was home. Because she was loved. Because, after all the storms, all the loss, all the loneliness and silence, there was finally a heartbeat in the walls. And it sounded exactly like family.